Hey guys, tonight we wake not to a cheery alarm clock, but to a grey dawn dripping through thatched roofs, the smell of damp straw and smoke stinging your nose. Chickens scratch somewhere outside, and you stir on a lumpy straw mattress, realizing it's time to trudge into what may be the absolute basement of the medieval job market. Forget visions of knights in shining armor or ladies weaving tapestries. You've just signed up for the shifts nobody wanted, the ones that made life barely survivable. And spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't last a single day at any of them, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love imagining these grimy medieval jobs echoing into your world right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The reality is that medieval society ran on invisible labor, the kind most chronicles barely mention. Mainstream fact: while nobles and clerics dominate written history, the bulk of medieval towns and villages relied on trades so foul, dangerous, or humiliating that even peasants turned up their noses. Historians still argue whether some of these roles were inherited family curses or desperate last options. But evidence shows many workers clung to them because, surprisingly, they sometimes paid better than respectable trades. You stretch stiff arms, brush hay off your tunic, and groan at the thought of the day's tasks. Will you descend into cesspits as a Gong farmer, or haul hides through vats of dog dung in the tanner's yard? Either way, breakfast isn't going to taste good. Quirky tidbit: some chroniclers joke that you could smell certain tradesmen from streets away, long before you saw them. Joke 1 slips in: imagine needing a marketing campaign because your perfume is sewage. You shuffle toward the door, boots already damp from yesterday's mud. The village stirs, smiths spark their forges, bakers pull hot loaves, but you head in the opposite direction, toward the edges of town, where the worst jobs wait. That's the thing. Unpleasant work always gets pushed to the margins, near rivers, ditches, or fields nobody else wants. The air grows thicker the further you walk, carrying hints of ammonia, tallow smoke, or worse. You hold your breath, but it's no use. These odors belong to your day now. Mainstream fact again: medieval towns actually passed laws about where nuisance trades could operate, pushing tanners, fullers, and butchers to outer wards. Historians still argue whether this was about sanitation or simply keeping elites' noses unoffended. But the effect was the same: you labored out of sight, out of mind. You arrive at the edge of town, where workers already gather. Some carry rakes, others buckets, some just look resigned. You trade nods, camaraderie forged less by pride than by shared disgust. You joke to yourself, whispering joke 2, we're not colleagues, we're survivors in the medieval edition of the world's worst internship. The day stretches ahead like an unpaved road, dirty, dangerous, poorly lit. But also, oddly, full of strange little stories. Because in every one of these trades, people found ways to laugh, to grumble, to stitch survival together with scraps of humor. That's what you're about to step into: the stink, the sweat, and the surprisingly human resilience behind the absolute worst jobs of medieval history. Joke 3 flickers as you grab a rake. Honestly, with my luck, the sewage pit will be the highlight of my week. The sun hasn't fully risen when you find yourself staring at a wooden hatch in the ground. The boards creak, the hinges groan, and the smell that seeps out could drop a grown ox. Welcome to your shift as a Gong farmer. Yes, that's a polite medieval phrase for climbing into cesspits to shovel out human waste. You grip your rake, glance at the bucket beside you, and wonder if the extra coins are really worth it. Spoiler: they are, but barely. Mainstream fact: Gong farmers were usually hired by towns to clean cesspits and privies, often working at night when fewer people were awake to gag at the smell. They were actually paid above average wages because nobody else wanted the job. Historians still argue whether this pay made them oddly prosperous or whether their social isolation outweighed the money. But either way, they stood apart in both wealth and stench. You descend slowly, boots squelching in muck you'd rather not identify. The air is thick, choking, and every breath feels like swallowing a sour cloud. Quirky tidbit: workers sometimes chewed strong herbs like mint to mask the stench in their throats. You try it with a sprig, but joke one rises immediately, yeah, because minty breath is really going to help when you're literally marinating in filth. Your rake scrapes against sludge, your bucket fills, and you haul it up where another laborer tips it into a cart. The work is endless, heavy, and dangerously toxic. Mainstream fact again: prolonged exposure to cesspits could cause illness or even suffocation, methane and ammonia gases building in enclosed spaces. Historians still argue whether Gong farmers developed techniques to avoid this, like timing their work with ventilation, but records do mention men collapsing mid-shift. Above you, villagers mutter thanks, though they step far back, covering their noses with sleeves. Children giggle, pointing at your filth-covered tunic, while their parents hush them. You're invisible and unforgettable at the same time. Later, as you haul another load to the fields, you realize this muck has value. Quirky tidbit again: waste was sold as fertilizer, so the Gong farmer wasn't just cleaning, he was part of the agricultural economy. Joke 2 slips out as you sling a bucket over your shoulder, so technically, I'm less a cesspit diver and more an early recycling specialist. By midnight, your muscles ache, your clothes stink beyond saving, and your stomach flips every time you breathe. But the coins clink heavy in your pouch, more than a carpenter might make in the same hours. You collapse onto a stool, half proud, half disgusted. Neighbors won't sit next to you in church. You'll sleep in separate quarters. Your smell announcing you long before you speak. Still, without you, cesspits overflow, streets reek, and epidemics spread faster. Mainstream fact once more: urban sanitation was precarious in the Middle Ages, and jobs like this, awful as they were, kept towns functioning. Historians still argue whether medieval sanitation was more advanced than stereotypes suggest, but Gong farmers were at its core. As dawn peaks again, you wipe your brow with a sleeve that makes things worse. You mutter joke 3 as you stagger toward home: the pay is good, but honestly, I'll never complain about taking the trash out again. The cesspit stench still clings to your tunic when a new shift drags you toward the riverbank. You'd think water means freshness, but not here. This is the tannery, where hides rot, soak, and reek their way into leather. You trudge past vats bubbling with lime water, piles of skins heaped like collapsed sails, and workers ankle-deep in filth that the river carries away just fast enough to poison the next village downstream. Mainstream fact: tanning was essential for producing leather, which the medieval world needed for shoes, belts, armor, harnesses, and endless straps. But the process was so foul that tanneries were banished to the edges of town, often downstream from drinking sources. Historians still argue whether medieval people recognized the real health risks or just found the smell unbearable, but laws consistently shoved tanners out of respectable neighborhoods. Your job begins with scraping. A hide is hauled over a beam, and with a blunt knife you push away fat, flesh, and whatever the butcher left clinging. Quirky tidbit: one stage of tanning used fermented dog poop or pigeon droppings as part of the soak, since the enzymes helped soften the hides. You gag as a bucket of it is poured in, muttering joke 1, congratulations, I've just discovered the medieval recipe for eau de disgust. The hides are then plunged into lime water to loosen hair. You stir with a paddle, trying not to breathe too deeply as caustic liquid splashes dangerously close to your skin. Mainstream fact again: lime burns could scar hands and blind eyes if it splashed. Historians still argue whether workers had protective gear like crude gloves or if they just sacrificed apprentices' skin to the vats. Once softened, the hides are beaten, stretched, and hung. You pull on ropes until your shoulders scream, the stench of wet fur and decay overwhelming. Still, the transformation is remarkable, the slime-covered hide gradually becoming pliable, strong, and usable. You realize that this stink underpins every boot that marches, every belt that fastens, every book bound in leather. By midday, your stomach churns from both hunger and odor. Workers gnaw bread with filthy hands, shrugging off the grime. Joke 2 slips out as you chew. At this point, the bread probably tastes better dipped in lime water. But there's profit here too. Finished leather sells high, and tanners often earned better than simple farmhands. Quirky tidbit again, some towns even had wealthy guilds of leatherworkers who, despite the stink, held economic sway. Imagine smelling like dung and still winning political arguments at council. The sun sets, but the smell doesn't. It clings to hair, skin, even dreams. Neighbors cross the street to avoid you, church pews mysteriously empty when you arrive. Yet without you, knights would fight barefoot, monks would lose their bookbindings, and merchants their purses. Mainstream fact one more time, leather was so vital that wars sometimes disrupted supply, causing panics. Historians still argue whether alternatives like cloth or would ever truly sufficed, but leather remained king. You collapse by the riverside, staring at the glowing water, foul with runoff. Joke 3 drifts from your lips. Honestly, if hell has a smell, the tanners already copyrighted it. The river stench fades into marsh mist as you wade thigh-deep into reeds, trousers soaked and boots squelching. Today's job? Collecting leeches. Yes, the slimy, wriggling, blood-sucking kind, because in medieval medicine, these little creatures were tools of the trade. You try not to shudder as one brushes your ankle. Spoiler, it won't just brush. Mainstream fact, leeches were widely used for bloodletting, a practice physicians believed could balance the body's humors. From the 12th century onward, demand skyrocketed, so much so that marshes in parts of Europe were stripped of leeches entirely. Historians still argue whether doctors sincerely thought they were curing patients or just selling fashionable treatments. But for you, it doesn't matter. You're the supplier. You shuffle carefully, reeds rustling, a sack tied at your waist. Soon enough, leeches latch onto your legs, squirming under fabric, sucking steadily. You wince, trying to peel them off and plop them into the sack. Quirky tidbit, collectors sometimes used animals, like sickly cows driven through ponds, to gather leeches, scraping them off hides afterward. Today, you are the cow. Joke 1 mutters as you pry another from your shin. Great, I'm paying with my own blood just to earn a few coins. The work isn't just gross, it's dangerous. Too many bites can leave you dizzy, weak, even infected. Mainstream fact again, leech collectors often bore permanent scars. Their legs mottled with sores. Historians still argue whether they were considered skilled specialists or expendable laborers, but either way, their work filled jars in apothecaries from London to Constantinople. A splash startles you, a frog leaps, sending ripples through the marsh. Your sack wriggles with captured leeches, a living purse of nightmares. You haul it to shore, where others are already pouring slimy heaps into clay jars filled with rainwater. The jars are sealed, labeled, and sold to physicians, barbers, or even traveling quacks. Quirky tidbit again, some households kept leeches in the pantry like we might keep aspirin, ready to treat fevers or headaches. You imagine reaching for pickles only to grab a jar of writhing worms. Joke 2 bubbles up, nothing says home comfort like a side of leeches with your stew. By midday, your legs itch and sting, tiny trails of blood mixing with mud. You smear clay on the wounds, an old trick to stop the bleeding. The others joke darkly, comparing who has the fattest leech bite today. You laugh too, though you feel faint. Still, you know physicians pay well. A jar of leeches can feed your family for weeks. Demand is so high that some collectors smuggle sacks across borders. Mainstream fact once more, leech shortages in the 19th century even caused price spikes, though the medieval trade had already shown signs of overharvesting. Historians still argue whether this was proto-ecological awareness or just panic about profits. As the sun dips, you limp back with your jars clinking. Your calves ooze faintly, your sack smells like wet earth. And your stomach churns. You mutter joke 3 under your breath, honestly, I'd rather have the plague than be its treatment. The marsh fades behind you, but there's no rest, you're marched straight to a wooden vat bubbling with liquid that smells suspiciously familiar. Welcome to the fuller's yard, where cloth gets cleaned, thickened, and finished. Your job: stomping wool in tubs of lye and urine until it turns soft, sturdy, and market ready. You roll your sleeves, look at the steaming vat, and wonder why every medieval job seems determined to ruin your sense of smell. Mainstream fact: fulling was a crucial stage in medieval textile production. Raw woolen cloth was greasy, loose, and fragile. By soaking it in water mixed with urine or fuller's earth, then stomping it for hours, workers bound the fibers and made it durable. Historians still argue whether fullers were respected artisans or smelly outcasts, but their guilds held real economic weight in cloth-producing towns. You climb into the vat, bare feet sinking into warm liquid that squelches between your toes. The cloth beneath feels slimy and rough. You begin stomping rhythmically, knees lifting high, sweat dripping down your temples. Quirky tidbit: fuller's urine, nicknamed chamber lye, was collected from households. Some towns even taxed people on the urine they donated. You picture the tax collector with a sloshing bucket and mutter joke 1, imagine paying rent in P, talk about liquid assets. Hours pass. You stomp, twist, stomp again. Your legs ache, your skin burns faintly from the lye, and the smell clings like a curse. Mainstream fact again: some fullers developed chronic respiratory issues from inhaling ammonia fumes, while others suffered skin ulcers. Historians still argue whether protective tricks existed, like oiling legs with fat, or if workers just endured. Around you, other fullers keep time by singing. One belts a bawdy tune about a shepherd and a nun, another invents verses mocking the town officials. The rhythm helps, but the stink cancels the cheer. The vats steam in the cold air, giving the yard a ghostly haze. By midday, the cloth is hauled out, rinsed, and laid on tenters, wooden frames with hooks. That's where the phrase "on tenterhooks" comes from, the cloth literally stretched taut to dry. Quirky tidbit again: towns fined fullers if their cloth shrank too much or came out uneven, meaning your aching legs are blamed if fashion fails. You rub your calves and joke 2, who knew medieval quality control involved my feet as the warranty? The overseer inspects the day's batch, frowning at stains, nodding at tight weaves. You pray he approves. It's the difference between wages and punishment. And wages matter, though the job reeks. Cloth drives the medieval economy. Mainstream fact one more time: wool exports funded entire kingdoms, especially in England and Flanders. Historians still argue whether the fullers' guilds had political clout or were treated as necessary nuisances, but no one denies their role. Evening falls, and you scrape residue off your feet, wincing at raw skin. The stink refuses to leave, no matter how many buckets of river water you pour over yourself. You mutter joke 3 as you stagger away: if hell has a spa, it definitely includes a urine foot bath. Your legs are still sore from stomping cloth, but now you're marched uphill, toward a yawning kiln glowing orange in the dusk. This is the lime burner station, where chalk and limestone are roasted into the quicklime that builds castles, cathedrals, and city walls. The air is sharp, acrid, and hot enough to sting your eyes even at a distance. You squint, pull your tunic tighter, and prepare for a shift that's equal parts sweat and danger. Mainstream fact: lime was essential in medieval construction. Mixed with water and sand, it became mortar, plaster, or even whitewash. Every fortress wall and parish church owed part of its strength to lime. Historians still argue whether lime burners were skilled craftsmen or expendable laborers. But either way, they worked in conditions that scorched lungs and scarred skin. You shoulder a basket of quarried chalk, trudging toward the kiln's mouth. The heat blasts your face, like opening an oven scaled up to terrifying proportions. You dump the load, then retreat quickly, coughing. Quirky tidbit: lime kilns were sometimes left burning for weeks, fed continuously with stone and fuel. Villagers joked they glowed like miniature volcanoes, and you can see why. The danger isn't just the heat, it's the dust. As you break stones into smaller chunks, powder fills the air, coating your throat. You cough until your ribs ache. Mainstream fact again, inhaling lime dust caused chronic lung disease. And splashes of quicklime could eat through skin. Historians still argue whether workers developed special cloth masks or simply tied rags over their mouths, but most accounts describe constant wheezing and burns. By midday, you're drenched in sweat. The kiln roars like a beast, flames licking higher as more wood is shoveled in. Sparks dance dangerously close to your tunic. One man's sleeve catches fire, and he slaps it out with a curse. Joke one blurts in your mind, "Great, the only thing worse than this job is being cremated on the clock." The pay? Decent compared to farm labor, but hardly luxurious. Lime burners were necessary for every building project, yet no lord wanted their kilns nearby. Quirky tidbit again, kilns were often built outside town limits, partly for safety, partly because nobody wanted the smell and smoke. You imagine townsfolk thanking you for mortar while refusing to sit next to you at church. Evening settles, but your shift doesn't end, the kiln must be fed constantly. Night work under flickering firelight feels eerie, shadows stretching like demons across the hillside. Your hands blister from hauling, your eyes sting from smoke, your throat feels raw. Mainstream fact once more, quicklime mixed with water reacts violently, spitting heat and steam. Workers had to be careful even in storage. Historians still argue whether medieval lime burners understood the chemistry or simply treated it as sorcery, but they respected the danger. You've seen men lose fingers from careless handling. At last, you stagger back, skin coated in chalky dust, lungs burning. The kiln still glows, demanding more. You mutter joke too, half-choked, "If I survive this shift, I'll personally whitewash my own tomb." You collapse on the ground, stars hazy above, heat still clinging to your skin. Joke 3 drifts as your eyelids close, "Honestly, I think the rocks are having a better day than I am." You barely catch your breath before the bell tolls again, this time not for work, but for death. The town is sick, the air heavy with fear, and someone has to dig the pits. Congratulations, you're now a plague pit digger. The job is grim, the pay immediate, and the risk. Let's just say it makes lime burning look like a summer holiday. Mainstream fact, during outbreaks of plague and other epidemics, mass graves were dug to handle the overwhelming number of bodies. Individual burials were often impossible, pits were lined, bodies layered, and quicklime scattered to hasten decomposition. Historians still argue whether these pits were organized with any ritual respect or simply hurried dumps. But accounts agree that the site haunted communities for generations. You grip your shovel, hands blistered already, and step into the churchyard. The ground is uneven, soil damp, and the priest stands nearby muttering prayers. Behind you, a cart rattles, covered in canvas. You know what lies beneath. Quirky tidbit, some towns required diggers to ring bells as they passed, warning people to clear the streets. You're grateful you only have to dig, the work is brutal. You and 2 others carve into the soil, throwing spadefuls aside, sweat dripping despite the cold. The pit must be deep, at least 6 feet, often more, to hold multiple layers. The cart creaks closer, and the priest grows louder in his chants. Joke 1 pushes through the lump in your throat. Who knew my career advancement plan was literally 6 feet down? When the canvas is pulled back, the reality stings harder than the stench. The bodies are lowered quickly, no names, no coffins, just cloth bundles. You scatter lime as instructed, white powder puffing in the breeze. Mainstream fact again, quicklime was believed to stop contagion and speed decay, though historians still argue whether it truly reduced infection or simply masked the smell. Either way, the powder burns your eyes and nose. By dusk, the pit is half filled. Another cart approaches. You grip your shovel tighter, muscles screaming, back stiff. Quirky tidbit again, plague diggers were sometimes promised indulgences by the church, their work considered an act of mercy. Imagine that, your ticket to heaven stamped by a shovel, villagers watch from a distance, faces pale, sleeves pressed over mouths. No one dares come closer. You are both essential and untouchable. The priest avoids your eyes, hurrying through blessings. You realize your work makes everyone else's denial possible, they can mourn safely because you dig dangerously, the pit fills at last. You shovel the final earth, tamp it down, and stagger back. Your tunic reeks, your arms ache, and your heart feels hollow. You mutter joke too through cracked lips, honestly, I'd rather take another leech bath than sign up for this shift again. The night is quiet, too quiet. You lie on your straw mat, unable to sleep, the weight of the day pressing on your chest. Historians still argue whether plague diggers survived longer, immune from exposure, or died sooner, consumed by the very work that fed them. You close your eyes and wonder which side of that debate you'll end up on. Joke 3 drifts into the dark, if ghosts really linger by graves, I'll be the busiest man in town. The grave soil still clings under your nails when you're handed a new assignment, rat catcher. It sounds almost comical compared to plague pits, but don't let the title fool you. You're about to crawl through alleys and granaries, chasing rodents that bite, scratch, and spread fear almost as fast as gossip. Mainstream fact, medieval towns struggled constantly with rats and mice, especially in grain stores. Catchers used traps, smoke, and sometimes ferrets or dogs to flush them out. Their role was oddly respected yet reviled, the town needed them, but nobody wanted to stand too close. Historians still argue whether rats were directly blamed for plague in the Middle Ages or whether people linked them only with filth and spoiled grain. But rat catchers worked either way, you shoulder a sack of traps, a net, and, if you're lucky, a wiry ferret trained to dive after rodents. The alley reeks of garbage, fish guts, and yesterday's chamber pots dumped from windows. Quirky tidbit, some rat catchers displayed their kills publicly, stringing rodents on poles as proof of service. You try to imagine advertising your job with a necklace of vermin. Joke 1 hisses as you set a trap, nothing says professionalism like waving a dead rat at your boss. The work is frantic. You kneel, scatter bait, slide traps into shadows. Moments later, squeals erupt, a rat darts, snap goes the trap, and you yank it free. You toss it into your sack, which wriggles uncomfortably against your back. By midday, you're drenched in sweat, your arms scratched, and your ferret sulks from overwork. Mainstream fact again, rat catchers sometimes sold captured rodents to apothecaries or for folk remedies, where dried parts were used in dubious cures. Historians still argue whether this was genuine medicine or pure superstition, but to you it's just another coin in the pouch. A baker's wife peers from her doorway, tossing you a crust of bread as thanks. She won't let you inside, though. Rat catchers carried stigma, the smell of their work, the association with filth, even rumors that some secretly bred rats just to stay in business. Quirky tidbit again, accusations like that followed catchers in several towns. Painting them as both solution and problem, evening comes, and you've filled your sack with a squirming nightmare. You haul it to the town square, dump the bodies into a pit, and collect your fee. It isn't much, but it's survival. You mutter joke too as you wipe sweat from your brow, honestly, at this point, I'm starting to think the rats deserve a union. Back home, you itch all over, convinced phantom whiskers brush your skin. Every squeak in the dark makes you twitch. Historians still argue whether rat catchers reduced infestations meaningfully or whether they were just one piece of a bigger, losing battle against medieval filth. From your perspective, the job feels endless. You collapse on your straw bed, sack empty now but your head full of squeals. Joke 3 drifts into the shadows, with all these plague pits and rat sacks, maybe my next career should just be ghost wrangler. Your night is restless, haunted by phantom squeaks, but morning brings yet another foul task, the Tallow Chandler's workshop. You step inside a dim room lined with bubbling kettles, each one spitting greasy fumes into the air. Today you'll render fat into candles, standing over cauldrons of scalding sludge until your clothes reek and your lungs feel coated. Mainstream fact: candles were essential in medieval life, used for lighting churches, markets, and homes. The cheapest ones were made from tallow, animal fat rendered down to waxy form. Beeswax candles burned cleaner but were expensive luxuries, so tallow kept most of Europe lit. Historians still argue whether chandlers were despised for their stink or valued as vital artisans. But either way, their workshops always smelled like kitchens gone horribly wrong. You grab a ladle, stirring a vat where lumps of fat hiss and melt into liquid. The stench is overwhelming, sweet, greasy, and nauseating all at once. Quirky tidbit: some chandlers used kitchen scraps and even rotting fat, which only worsened the smell. Joke 1 slips out as you gag: nothing says job satisfaction like breathing eau de beef drippings all day. The process is simple but grueling. Wicks are dipped, layer by layer, into molten tallow, cooled, then dipped again until candles form. You stand for hours, rhythm mechanical, hands raw from heat and splatter. Mainstream fact again: tallow chandlers risked burns constantly, boiling fat clings viciously to skin. Historians still argue whether apprentices bore the brunt of accidents or if everyone shared the danger, but scars marked nearly every worker. By midday, your tunic reeks so badly you can't smell anything else. A neighbor complains that chandler workshops attract vermin, since scraps of fat and suet linger everywhere. Quirky tidbit again: city ordinances often banished chandlers to the outskirts, same as tanners and fullers. You sigh: once again, your work keeps the town alive but leaves you unwelcome at dinner. As candles pile up on racks, you notice imperfections: lumpy sides, smoky wicks. The overseer frowns, warning that bad candles could be fined at market. Joke 2 slips through your teeth: imagine risking third-degree burns just to make the medieval version of a defective light bulb. Evening comes, but your shift doesn't end. Chandlers often worked by candlelight themselves, dipping wicks into the very vats that scorched their arms. The irony isn't lost on you: burning yourself to make something that will burn later. Mainstream fact once more: candles shaped religious life too, monasteries measured time by them, and guilds supplied churches with vast quantities. Historians still argue whether chandlers' guilds wielded much political influence or just enforced quality, but they certainly kept the town glowing. At last, your batch is done. You haul trays of greasy candles to the storeroom, the air thick with smoke. You stagger home reeking so badly that even the rat catcher might wrinkle his nose. You mutter joke 3 as you peel off your tunic: honestly, I smell like I lost a fistfight with a friar. The greasy stink of tallow clings to your skin, but today's task trades smoke for stone. You're led into a narrow shaft carved into a hillside, torchlight flickering against damp beams. Welcome to mining, the medieval version. You duck low, shoulders scraping, and realize quickly this isn't a job for the claustrophobic. Mainstream fact: medieval miners extracted metals like lead, tin, copper, silver, and iron, fueling coinage, weapons, and tools. Mines stretched across Europe from Cornwall to the Harz Mountains, often worked by free men, but sometimes by peasants bound to lords. Historians still argue whether mining brought real prosperity to communities or simply fed royal treasuries. But everyone agrees it chewed through bodies and lives. You crawl into the darkness, boots sliding on mud. The air is damp, heavy with dust. You swing a pick at the rock face, sparks flying, chunks breaking loose. Quirky tidbit: miners often relied on candlelight stuck to helmets with clay or fat, tiny flames guttering dangerously close to hair. You picture your scalp catching fire and mutter joke 1: great, nothing like doubling as both worker and lantern. The dangers stack quickly. The ceiling creaks, timbers groan, water drips into puddles. Flooding is constant, and men work with buckets to bail it out. Mainstream fact again, collapses and floods were so common that miners prayed to saints like St. Barbara for protection. Historians still argue whether medieval mines had effective drainage systems or just endless buckets, but surviving accounts describe constant fear. Hours pass. You haul sacks of ore, spine bending, arms screaming. The air grows stale, your head spins. You light another candle, watching smoke curl sideways from drafts that might signal a collapse. Quirky tidbit again, miners carried canaries or even mice in cages, not for cuteness but as warning systems. If the animal keeled over, so might you. Midday comes and goes. You chew bread coated with dust, washing it down with metallic water. Joke 2 grumbles as you crunch grit between your teeth. Who needs salt when your sandwich comes pre-seasoned with iron filings? By evening, you stumble back up the shaft, face smeared with soot, lungs burning. The ore you've hauled will be smelted into coins or swords, but your wages are meager. Still, mining pays better than farming, which is why men risk their lives underground day after day. Mainstream fact once more, entire mining towns grew around these shafts, their wealth tied to the rock beneath. Historians still argue whether that wealth trickled down or merely gilded crowns, but looking at your empty pouch, you know the answer. As you collapse on your straw mat, ears still ringing with pickaxe clangs, you mutter joke 3 into the dark, honestly, I think the rocks are getting more out of this job than I am. You stumble out of the mine soot-streaked and coughing, but instead of rest, you're shoved into a kitchen so vast it feels like a battlefield. Pots clang, fires roar, spits creak as entire carcasses rotate over flames. Welcome to life as a Scullion, the bottom rung of the great kitchen hierarchy. Your job. Everything no one else wants, scrubbing, chopping, hauling, and getting yelled at for breathing too loudly. Mainstream fact, medieval noble households ran on enormous kitchens, sometimes employing dozens of cooks, spit boys, bakers, and scullions. The scullions were lowest, often young boys or poor laborers, doing backbreaking cleaning work from dawn until long past dark. Historians still argue whether kitchens offered a chance to climb the ranks or just trapped workers in endless servitude. But records show a lucky few rose to become cooks or stewards. You grab a bucket and scrub pots blackened with soot, grease clinging like glue. The water is lukewarm, your rag already torn. Quirky tidbit, spit boys, who turned the roasting spits by hand, sometimes tied ropes to dogs or even geese and tread wheels to keep the meat moving. You glance at a panting hound trudging in circles and mutter joke 1, at least someone's job here is worse than mine, and he's a dog. But your shift barely begins. A cook barks orders, you lug sacks of flour, carry logs for the oven, fetch water from the well. Your arms shake, back aches, and yet dinner must be served for hundreds in the hall. Mainstream fact again, feasts could last hours, with multiple courses of meats, pies, and spiced wines. Kitchens worked in frenzy to meet demand. Historians still argue whether these feasts were displays of abundance or reckless waste, but you just know they leave more dishes for you. By midday, you're chopping onions until tears stream down your face. The cook laughs, accusing you of weeping at the honor of serving. Quirky tidbit again, kitchen scraps didn't go to waste, they were often collected for servants' meals or fed to pigs. You eye the scrap bucket hungrily, realizing dinner may not include anything fresher, the heat is suffocating. Fires blaze on every side, steam rises from cauldrons, and your tunic sticks to your skin. You slip on grease, nearly drop a tray of trenchers, and get cuffed for clumsiness. Joke 2 squeezes out as you rub your shoulder. Who knew the medieval food chain ended with me actually on the floor? Night falls, but the work doesn't stop. After the feast, you scrape bones from platters, scrub greasy knives, and mop ale from floors. Your arms ache so badly you can barely lift a broom. Mainstream fact once more, Scullions often slept in the kitchens themselves, curled near dying embers, ready to rise before dawn. Historians still argue whether this proximity meant privilege or just relentless exploitation. To you, it's simply exhaustion. At last, you slump beside the hearth, surrounded by towers of pots that will need scrubbing again tomorrow. Your hair reeks of smoke, your hands are blistered, and you mutter joke 3 before sleep drags you down. Honestly, I think the geese on the treadwheel are better unionized than I am. The kitchen smoke still lingers in your hair when the next assignment drags you outside to the stables. At first, it doesn't sound too bad. You'll be a groom. But then you see the carcass at the far end of the yard, and you realize your second title is Knacker. Welcome to the medieval life of mucking stalls at dawn and rendering dead horses by dusk. Mainstream fact: grooms tended the Lord's horses, cleaning, feeding, and saddling them, while knackers disposed of dead or diseased animals. Horses were essential in medieval society, for travel, war, farming, so their care mattered. Yet the disposal of carcasses was viewed as unclean. Historians still argue whether knackers were tolerated as necessary specialists or shunned like butchers and tanners. But the work was always taboo. You start with stalls. The floor is a slurry of straw, dung, and sour urine. You shovel, your back bending again and again, while horses snort and stamp impatiently. Quirky tidbit: some grooms whispered charms into horses' ears, believing it kept them calm or warded off sickness. You try a whisper, and joke 1 bubbles up. If talking to horses worked, half my job would be motivational speeches. But the worst part waits. A horse has died, and its body must be removed. You and 2 others loop ropes around the legs, straining to drag it toward the rendering yard. The stench is immediate, and your stomach lurches. Mainstream fact again: knackers boiled carcasses to make tallow, glue, or hide, recycling what they could. Historians still argue whether this economy was efficient necessity or grisly profiteering, but the reality is equally unpleasant. The cauldron bubbles, fat rising to the surface. You skim it into buckets, gagging at the greasy smoke. Quirky tidbit again: glue made from horse hooves was used for bookbinding, furniture, even instruments. You stare at the steaming pot and think joke 2, so next time you open a medieval manuscript, remember, it's basically bound with my nightmares. By midday, the yard reeks of singed hair and sour flesh. Flies swarm, dogs circle, and you swat them away with your sleeve. Villagers pass quickly, pretending not to notice. You understand why this work brands you. People might nod thanks, but they won't invite you near their table. The pay: enough to keep food on the bench, but never enough to wash off the stink. Mainstream fact once more: knackers often lived on the edge of towns, their yards infamous for the smell. Historians still argue whether they were feared as carriers of disease or merely avoided for their odor, but either way, isolation was part of the deal. Evening brings no rest. Horses must still be fed, brushed, and saddled for tomorrow. Your arms are raw, your clothes ruined, and you wonder how you've survived another shift. You collapse into the straw, scratching at your skin, muttering joke 3 with a tired grin. Honestly, at this point, I think I smell worse than the Gong farmer. The stink of boiled horse clings to your tunic when you're summoned to a very different duty. You're handed a hood, a rope, and a blade polished to a grim shine. Tonight, you are the town's executioner. It's a job that pays well but costs everything else: reputation, friends, even a seat in church. Mainstream fact: medieval executioners carried out sentences ordered by courts: hangings, beheadings, burnings, and mutilations. They were both feared and necessary, living at the margins of society. Historians still argue whether executioners were despised outcasts or reluctant professionals who inherited the role, but records show their families often struggled with stigma for generations. You wait in the square as a crowd gathers. Merchants hawk food, children climb walls, and neighbors chatter as though this were a fair. Quirky tidbit: Some towns treated executions as public entertainment, scheduling them alongside market days. You glance at the crowd and mutter joke one, nothing says date night like watching your local executioner at work. The condemned is led out, prayers murmured, face pale. You steady your breath, lift the rope, tie the knot. Every move is watched. The sheriff nods, and the moment arrives. Mainstream fact again, a botched execution was a scandal, sometimes punished harshly, so executioners practiced endlessly with dummies or animals. Historians still argue whether most were skilled professionals or clumsy butchers. But everyone remembered their mistakes. You swing the blade, or pull the lever, or tighten the knot, depending on the day's order. The crowd gasps, some cheer, some pray. Your hands shake, but you don't show it. You've done your duty, and yet you feel the weight of every stare. Quirky tidbit again, executioners sometimes doubled as healers, using their expert knowledge of anatomy to set bones or sell salves. Imagine going to the man who hanged your cousin for a poultice. Joke 2 sneaks out, talk about a side hustle, bone setter by day, head remover by afternoon. Afterward, you clean the tools, pocket your pay, and retreat to your lonely house outside the walls. Neighbors avoid you, children whisper ghost stories about your shadow. Yet, in a strange way, you are safe, few dare attack an executioner, fearing curses or retribution. Mainstream fact once more, in some towns, executioners wore special clothes or carried emblems to mark their role. Historians still argue whether this was protection, humiliation, or both. Night falls. You sit by a small fire, the coins heavy in your pouch, your heart heavier still. You mutter joke 3 into the flames, honestly, I'm the only guy who gets job security and job stigma in the same contract. The hood and rope are set aside, but your new shift drags you not to gallows or stables, this time, to the coast. The sea air should smell fresh, but here it's sharp with brine and smoke. Welcome to the salt pans, where you scrape white crystals under the punishing sun. It looks almost magical, glittering like snow, but within minutes you realize it's blistering, backbreaking work. Mainstream fact, salt was the lifeblood of medieval economies. It preserved food, seasoned meals, and even paid taxes. White gold, some called it. Vast saltworks dotted coasts and marshes, from Brittany to Venice. Historians still argue whether salt's high price was due more to scarcity or to ruthless taxation. But its importance made your miserable job unavoidable. You grab a wooden rake and wade into shallow pools. The brine has evaporated under the sun, leaving jagged crystals clinging to the mud. You bend, scrape, and heap them into baskets. Quirky tidbit, workers sometimes joked that salt pans gave them white legs, since the crystals and glare left skin raw and pale. You look at your shins and mutter joke 1, perfect, finally, a medieval spa treatment, minus the relaxation, massages, and everything nice. The heat grows merciless. The glare from the pans blinds your eyes, the salt stings every cut and blister. You lick cracked lips and taste nothing but brine. Mainstream fact again, salt workers often suffered sores, eye damage, and exhaustion from the endless glare and abrasion. Historians still argue whether guild protection softened conditions or whether salt workers remained expendable labor. By midday, sweat streams down your face, mixing with salt until it burns like fire. You dump basket after basket into heaps that glisten deceptively beautiful. Traders will haul these loads inland, their profits soaring higher than your wages. Quirky tidbit again, in some towns, salt was so heavily taxed that smuggling became a way of life. Salt contraband sparked riots, uprisings, even wars. You sigh, scraping another load, and joke 2, imagine risking your life just to smuggle what's basically table seasoning. The overseer inspects your pile, nodding. Still, you're told to rake more, because no amount is ever enough. Your back screams, your hands blister anew. The sun begins to sink. painting the pans gold, but you keep scraping until your body feels carved from salt itself. At last, the work ends. You stagger back, clothes stiff with crystals, lips cracked bloody. You collapse in a hut, trying not to rub salt into your wounds, literally. Mainstream fact once more, salt revenues filled royal treasuries, especially in France with the hated Cabelle tax. Historians still argue whether salt workers were proud of their vital role or crushed by endless exploitation, but lying here, you know the answer. You mutter joke 3 into the dark, honestly, if my body doesn't crumble into a giant pretzel tonight, it'll be a miracle. Your skin still burns from salt sores when the bell tolls again. Not for cesspits, not for rats, not for salt pans, it's the sound of shift's end. For once, you're not trudging toward another foul duty, but toward the tiny comforts that make survival possible. After all, even the worst jobs had after-shift rituals, scraps of humanity to balance the grind. Mainstream fact, medieval laborers sought solace in alehouses, churches, or simple communal meals after long days. Bread, broth, and beer were staples, cheap enough to fill a belly. Historians still argue whether these gatherings built solidarity among workers or just numbed exhaustion, but they mattered, because without them, the jobs might have been unendurable. You sit by the hearth in a smoky tavern, the room loud with laughter and clatter. Tankards slam, dice roll, and fiddles scrape out tunes that drown memory of muck and fumes. Quirky tidbit, workers often swapped worst job jokes, bragging whose day reeked more. Someone insists tannery stench beats cesspit duty, another swears salt sores hurt worse than lime burns. You raise your mug and mutter joke 1, honestly, I'm just glad my job didn't involve leeches today. Back home, you wash in cold water, scrubbing salt from sores, soot from hair, and dung from boots. It doesn't all come off, but at least you try. Mainstream fact again, saints and charms played a role too. Workers prayed to protect themselves from accidents. Whether to Saint Barbara for miners or Saint Erasmus for tanners. Historians still argue whether faith eased real dangers or just offered hope, but for you, the whispered prayers are part of the routine. Later, you sit on your straw bed, swapping stories with fellow laborers. One recalls the time his ferret refused to chase rats. Another laughs about candles that collapsed mid-feast. Quirky tidbit again, guild feasts sometimes allowed even lowly workers a taste of luxury, roasted meats, spiced wine, a rare reminder they mattered. You smile at the thought, belly full for once, and joke too, if they fed us like this every day, I'd almost forget I smell like boiled horse. The night grows quiet. You stretch sore arms, let exhaustion pull you down. Tomorrow may bring cesspits, kills, or plague pits again, but tonight, you hold on to the warmth of firelight, the taste of ale, and the company of others who endure just as you do. You murmur joke 3 as your eyes close, maybe the real worst job is just waking up for another shift. Now, let the echoes of labor fade. No more hissing cauldrons, no more picks striking stone, no more carts of the dead rattling through alleys. Imagine the noise softening, the fires dimming, until the medieval world grows still. Picture yourself leaving the workyard behind, walking slowly through quiet streets where torches flicker against stone walls. The smells that clung all day, tallow, lime, dung, smoke, dissolve into a gentle night breeze. Even the aches in your shoulders seem lighter, as though time itself has carried them away. Ahead lies a hearth glowing softly. You settle onto a wooden bench, warmth wrapping around you, the glow gentle, steady, safe. A simple bowl of broth waits, steam curling upward, not hurried, not forced, just enough to remind you of comfort. You lift it slowly, savoring each breath, each taste. Outside, stars scatter across the dark sky. In their light, the worst jobs are only stories now, distant echoes of lives once lived. You are not in the cesspit, nor the tannery, nor the salt pan. You are here, breathing slowly, resting completely. Let each breath ease you further into calm. Inhale gently, feel your chest rise. Exhale, feel your body soften into the bed beneath you. The world outside grows quieter still, footsteps fading. Voices hushed, the last tavern songs melting into silence. You are safe. You are warm. You are finished with labor for the night. All that remains is peace. Allow your eyes to close fully now, thoughts drifting like lanterns on a calm river. Let the darkness carry you, not as burden but as balm, soft and steady. Sleep comes, slow and kind, wrapping you in its quiet arms.